The TV showed a live feed of her hallway, no cameras were installed. I froze, remote still clutched in my hand, staring at the screen. The glow from the TV painted my living room in cold light, illuminating the faint outlines of furniture and casting a shadow that mimicked my own. The feed was grainy, like an old CCTV camera, but impossibly clear in some spots, so clear that I could see the worn scratches in the wooden floorboards, the peeling paint along the baseboards, even the small smudge where a hand had brushed against the wall. I didn't recognize the angle. The hallway on the screen stretched slightly longer than mine did. The doorway to the bathroom appeared closer, and the closet door at the far end seemed ajar in the feed, though in reality it was firmly shut. I pressed the volume button, nothing but the faint hum of the TV. I leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The hallway was empty, and yet, a shadow moved. Not a shadow I cast, or any trick of the reflection. It slithered along the walls, flickering unnaturally, as if the light itself didn't know where to fall. My pulse quickened. I checked the apartment. Empty. Silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the faint, almost imperceptible creak of the building settling. I laughed nervously, forcing a grin. Great. Hallucinations. That's normal. The shadow froze. I froze. On the screen, the closet door creaked open slowly, a shadow pooling into the doorway. My gaze shot to the real closet. Solid. Closed. Nothing moved. I turned off the TV. The screen went black, but the reflection lingered. For a second, I saw the hallway in the glossy glass, not mine, but the one the TV had shown. The angles were wrong, the perspective off. And then it was gone. I sank onto the couch, heart hammering. My hands trembled, leaving faint dents in the cushion. I tried to convince myself it was stress, or exhaustion, or some electrical glitch. I live alone. No one else had a key. I checked the locks again. Double locked. Window sealed. Nothing unusual. And yet, something had been there. I returned to the TV the next night. Part curiosity, part morbid need to see if it would happen again. I flicked it on. Regular channels, static, nothing. And then, without warning, the feed appeared. The hallway. Same grainy quality. Same elongated perspective. The closet door slightly open, exactly as before. But something was different. The shadow was standing still this time. Near the bathroom doorway. Its edges shimmered, like heat haze, flickering between clarity and abstraction. And then I noticed. It wasn't moving toward me. It was pacing in place. Back and forth, slowly, deliberately. I leaned closer. My own reflection in the TV's glass caught my eye. The hallway in the reflection didn't match the feed. In my reflection, the closet was closed. In the feed, it remained ajar. In that instant, I understood. The TV wasn't showing a camera angle. It was showing something else. Something impossible. A sound drifted from the hallway behind me. A soft scrape, like fingernails along wood. My body stiffened. I spun around. Empty. The apartment was still. The refrigerator hummed. Nothing else. I faced the TV again. On the feed, the shadow moved closer to the living room doorway, inching along the hallway as though drawn by me. My stomach twisted. I didn't move. My reflection trembled, but the shadow on the feed was smooth, deliberate. And then it froze. It turned its head. Not toward me, exactly, but toward the camera's perspective. Toward me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. My legs refused to obey. The nights passed, each one blending into the next in a haze of exhaustion and unease. Each night, the feed returned, always at the same time, always the same hallway. I began noticing inconsistencies. Small at first. A crack in the wall appeared one night that wasn't there the next. A picture frame on the feed tilted slightly, even though in reality it was flush. The feed seemed to anticipate movement, objects appearing or shifting on-screen before they manifested in my apartment. One night, I heard footsteps. Soft, deliberate, starting at the far end of the hallway. I froze. The TV glowed in the corner, casting the hallway onto my walls. And the sound on the feed matched. Footsteps echoing, each step timed perfectly. I tried calling out. My voice caught in my throat. I wanted to tell whoever, or whatever, there was nothing here, that this was my apartment, my life, and yet, the footsteps stopped when I didn't answer. On the feed, the shadow's pacing paused. Its head swiveled, listening. And then, almost imperceptibly, it nodded. The hair on the back of my neck stood. Sleep became a thin veil over reality. I dreamed of the hallway. Not mine, but the one the TV showed. In dreams, it extended endlessly, a corridor of peeling paint, warped shadows, and a faint, almost antiseptic smell that wasn't in my apartment. I would wake, heart hammering, and the TV would already be on, showing me the same hallway. Always the same. I began documenting. Notebook, pencil, timestamps. I tried to track discrepancies. Objects appearing on the feed first, reflections moving independently, doors opening that shouldn't. Every night, the feed grew more confident, more precise. I began to notice the feed was not random, it was cyclical, following a sequence. And then the figure appeared. Not a shadow this time. A woman. Indistinct in the grainy feed, but unmistakable. Long dark hair, a slouched posture, pacing slowly down the hallway. I squinted. The closet door opened and closed behind her, just as it had for me, though I hadn't touched it. I felt an odd pull, as if recognition was lodged somewhere deep in my brain. She looked familiar. Not intimately. Not someone I knew personally. But familiar enough that my chest tightened. I backed away from the screen. My apartment was quiet. The hallway was empty. No one else lived here. And yet, every night, the feed insisted, she existed here. Had existed here. I began noticing environmental echoes. The tiniest sounds in my apartment would sync with the feed. A creak of the floorboards in my bedroom, and the shadow on the feed would pause as if listening. A dropped pencil, and the figure's pace would falter slightly. I felt trapped in a feedback loop, my actions influencing the feed influencing my perception, until I could no longer distinguish the apartment from the screen. One night, I leaned close, almost pressing my forehead to the TV glass. I whispered, "Who are you?" The figure froze mid-step. And then, impossibly, the feed shifted. The hallway curved, twisted in a way my apartment never could. A door appeared that didn't exist. And from that door, I heard my own voice. Not on the TV, but behind me. Calling my name. I spun around. Empty. Silent. When I turned back, the feed showed the woman standing in front of the non-existent door. She lifted her hand, brushing it along the frame. And then she smiled. Small. Sad. Familiar. I realized she was remembering. The next day, I tore my apartment apart. Wiring, TV connections, coaxial cables, internet, anything that could feed a signal. Nothing. The feed persisted, regardless. The hallway remained, the figure pacing, the impossible angles mocking me. My reflection in the TV glass had begun to distort. I was taller. My shoulders were narrower. My hands thinner. Not real, not mine, but a version of me, walking a hallway that didn't exist. I tried to leave. Car, keys, backpack. The hallway followed me. Every reflection in the apartment, mirror, glass, polished table, showed her. The woman. And the hallway. Always longer than it should be, doors slightly open that never were, shadows pooling and flickering independently. It was then I understood. This wasn't a feed. This wasn't a malfunction. This was memory. The hallway remembered her. Remembered someone who had lived here, who had walked its length. And somehow, it wanted me to remember her too. I stayed awake for 3 nights straight. The feed never wavered. The woman's pacing slowed, then stopped. She leaned against the wall, staring into the camera, or at me. The TV's glow reflected across the ceiling, across the walls. And then, she began to fade. Not disappear. Fade. Slowly, melting into the textures of the hallway. The baseboards, the cracks in the paint, the peeling wallpaper absorbed her, leaving only the shape, only the memory. And then, finally, nothing. The hallway was empty. I sank to the floor, exhausted, trembling. My reflection stared back at me from the blank screen. And then I noticed the final anomaly, the closet door. Closed in my apartment. Closed on the feed. But a faint smudge remained on the floorboards, near the threshold. like someone had just stepped back into the hall. I leaned close, tracing it with my fingers. The wood was cold, empty, and yet, I remembered something I couldn't remember before. A laugh. Soft, warm, the shuffle of bare feet. A hand brushing along the wall. The TV flickered. A single frame appeared. The hallway. Empty. Perfectly normal. But in the corner, barely visible, a dark smudge of hair and shadow lingered. Watching. Remembering. I understood, finally, with a cold certainty that settled in my bones. The feed had never been about me. It had been about her. The hallway remembers everyone who walked it, and sometimes, it lets them walk again. I turned off the TV. The glow faded. The room returned to normal. And yet, I could still feel her presence in the hallway. Not behind me, not ahead, but everywhere the walls met the floor, in the angles that shouldn't exist, in the spaces where memory and reality blurred. I would never watch that TV again. And yet, some nights, when the apartment is quiet and the hum of the refrigerator fills the silence, I swear I see her. Just for a moment, in the corner of my eye. A memory, replaying itself, walking down a hallway that no longer belongs to anyone. I don't know who she was. I only know she remembers me. She heard footsteps in the attic. There was no attic. The sound came first as a faint creak, high above me, almost like the settling of the house. I paused mid-step, frozen in the kitchen, spoon still suspended over a bowl of cereal. My apartment is on the top floor. The ceiling is just drywall, flat, unyielding. I've seen the blueprints. There is no attic. No crawl space. No space above me at all, save for the drop ceiling and the ductwork. And yet, there it was again, a footstep, soft but deliberate, tapping against the ceiling above. I set the spoon down slowly, letting it clatter against the ceramic. The sound echoed strangely, as if the apartment was listening, waiting. I held my breath. Nothing moved. Nothing shifted. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft buzz of the fluorescent light above, even the faint rumble of a passing car outside, all of it remained normal. And still, the steps persisted, faintly, behind the plaster. I told myself it was the building settling. Old buildings creak. My apartment isn't even that old, barely 50 years, but wood and metal flex in ways that sound human sometimes. Yes, that's all it is. I went back to my cereal. The spoon hit my teeth, and I winced at the metallic clang. The footsteps stopped. That night, I lay awake in bed, listening. The apartment was quiet, eerily so, as if holding its breath. My ceiling lamp cast a pale, sterile glow over the room. Every so often, the light flickered, just slightly, as if disturbed by a passing shadow. My gaze kept flicking upward, toward the ceiling. A bulge had appeared there over the bed, small, subtle, no bigger than a handprint pressed into the plaster. I blinked. Nothing. The ceiling was flat, unbroken. I must be tired. The steps returned around 1:42 a.m. Precise. Measured. Slow. I could almost count the weight in them. Right left, the kind of pacing someone would use to avoid disturbing someone sleeping below. I couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my fingers over the sheets, cold and smooth. Dust fell from the ceiling in a tiny, near imperceptible flake. It wasn't an old plaster flake, it was the soft powdering of some invisible movement above. I began keeping track. Every night, the footsteps returned, at nearly the same time. I started marking the floor with chalk, drawing lines in a grid in case they were moving in a pattern. The grid was pointless. The sound always returned to the same spot, above the bed. Sometimes over the hallway, sometimes the living room. One night, I stood on a chair, trying to see above the ceiling panels in the closet. The fluorescent light made the reflective metal ductwork gleam. Nothing. Just the flat, industrial ceiling, gray and unyielding. And yet, the footsteps came again, now heavier, deliberate, almost aware of me. I began noticing subtle distortions in the apartment. The floorboards shifted slightly beneath my weight, as though guiding me somewhere. Doors that led nowhere sometimes seemed to stretch. The door to the bathroom, when closed, appeared slightly taller than normal. I would reach for the knob, and it felt farther. Sometimes I caught myself turning into a hallway that didn't exist, longer than it should be, corners bending at impossible angles. The ceiling itself began to betray its flatness. A shadow would pass overhead that didn't correspond to anything in the room. A faint slope, just for a moment, like a gabled roof. One night, the light fixture above the bed swayed gently. I didn't touch it. No draft. The apartment's air was still. I began doubting my memory. Did this apartment always feel this way? Did it always have the high ceilings and long hallway stretches I now occasionally glimpsed in the corners of my vision? The attic, I reminded myself firmly, does not exist. And yet, sometimes, when the footsteps were particularly insistent, I could swear I saw them from a corner of my eye, a shadow moving across the ceiling, bending the light unnaturally, like someone pacing above drywall that refused to be flat. I tried ignoring it. I tried sleeping through it. But every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the steps faintly echoing in memory before they even arrived. They anticipated me. The first time I tried to confront it directly, I stood on a chair, reaching for the ceiling above my bed. My fingers brushed against plaster. Cold, firm, unyielding. But the bulge had returned, soft, pliable, like it had weight behind it. I pressed. My hand sank slightly. It recoiled beneath me, and for an instant, I felt something move, soft, deliberate, like a foot stepping back. I fell off the chair, heart racing. The footsteps paused, then resumed. The apartment began to betray me in other ways. Reflections. Mirrors in the bathroom or the living room no longer matched reality perfectly. Sometimes the ceiling appeared to slope downward in the reflection, as if the room above had memory, retained some old architectural plan that never existed. I watched myself brush my teeth, and my reflection's head tilted up at a slightly different angle. I opened the fridge, my reflection's hand lingered a fraction of a second longer on the handle. I stopped looking in mirrors. One night, the footsteps changed. Softer. Almost hesitant. The sound was deliberate, slow, like someone was learning the contours of the ceiling above, testing them. I couldn't sleep. I crept into the living room, eyes scanning the ceiling. The air had shifted. Cold patches formed where the steps lingered, faint drafts that seemed to come from nowhere. And then I heard it. A laugh. Soft. Childlike. Familiar. Not my memory, but something else. Someone who had once lived above the plaster and lath of this apartment, or above where the plaster had once been. I froze. The sound didn't echo. It didn't bounce. It was inside my skull. I began to remember. Or maybe the apartment remembered for me. I remembered the house before it was subdivided into apartments. A single family home, attic stretching above the ceiling I now occupied. A little girl would run up there. She would hide in the rafters, make shadow shapes with the sloped ceiling, laugh when her mother called. I had never seen this house in that form. I wasn't alive then. And yet, the memory felt mine, or at least my body seemed to know it, a residual imprint of architecture and life combined. The footsteps weren't coming from above my ceiling. They weren't coming from anywhere physical. They were the echo of the house remembering itself. The attic that never existed in my lifetime existed somewhere in memory, in the plan of the walls, in the very shape of the beams that pressed above my head. I understood this slowly, with that creeping, bone-deep realization that always comes too late. I tried to ignore it. I covered my ears, I slept in other rooms, I even considered leaving the apartment entirely. But the house would not forget. The ceiling would bulge again. Light fixtures would sway. Shadows would stretch across the plaster. The footsteps would return, and with them, the faint, anticipatory echo of someone once walking above. I spoke to the landlord. He laughed. There's no attic. Top floor. Flat ceiling. HVAC ductwork. That's it. He didn't laugh the right way. His eyes flicked upward for a second too long. I thought I saw a shadow move across the ceiling in his reflection. I stopped talking to people. The apartment was mine, and it remembered me anyway. One night, the footsteps came down the hallway. Not above, not outside, but down the center of the apartment, through the rooms, pacing past. The kitchen, the bathroom, the bedroom. I could hear them in every wall, in the floor, in the air. The apartment shifted. A door I never saw before appeared at the end of the hall. Slightly ajar. I approached. My hand trembled. I reached for the knob. Cold metal. Smooth. Solid. I opened it. The hallway continued. Beyond the door, walls angled upward in a gable shape, low beams crossing overhead. Dust fell from above. Faint sunlight filtered through a tiny window I'd never seen. The footsteps stopped. And then I saw her. A little girl, hair dark and tangled, smiling up at me. She raised a hand, brushing it along the ceiling, as if checking the slope. She looked at me and nodded. Warm. Familiar. Sad. The realization hit me fully. She wasn't here. Not truly. The attic wasn't here. The house remembered her steps, her presence, her laughter. And sometimes, it let them walk again. I stepped back. The door vanished. The ceiling flattened. My reflection in the window showed only me, pale and wide-eyed, staring at a wall where a door had been. I could still hear her, though. Footsteps in memory, pacing over plaster and laugh that no longer existed. Laughing softly, playing in a space the apartment refused to forget. And I understood, with that cold certainty that seeps into your bones, the house isn't haunted. It is remembering. And I am not its tenant. I am merely another witness. The footsteps will never stop. They belong to someone who walked here before me. Someone who played in an attic that no longer exists. And the house remembers.